I'm Sharon Flint, the horticulture agent for Scott County. And Scott County is located here in what we traditionally call the central part of the state, around Lexington and all of that. So I'm located in Georgetown. And last year I tried some direct sowing, and of course I didn't pay much attention to it and didn't take care of it like I should. So it didn't work as well. But this year I'm looking into winter sowing of annuals, perennials, and native seed. And I'm just really excited about it. And I think hopefully you all will be too, or you probably have already heard about it. I felt like, where have I been? Why haven't I heard of this before? But it looks to be pretty good, pretty easy as well. So in many instances, as gardeners in our temperate climate, which means we get the change of the seasons for the most part, winter has become a shutdown time for gardeners. You know, you look at your catalogs, you plan next year's gardening. Sometimes you get a little crazy and go ahead and start some seed in your house. And then by the time they're grown and really ready to be transplanted outside, it's still too cold. So I've done that before, just getting a little excited. But really, the earliest we can actually start getting our hands in the soil is maybe February if we follow the traditional way. But with this, you can actually get started as early as November, and then also have something to do in December, January, and possibly February and March, even later. So in nature, a plant's purpose, of course, is just to reproduce itself and to create the next generation. And seed, many plants produce those seeds for that very purpose. And inside the seed, there is the embryonic plant and every bit of nourishment that that plant will need to get started in life. So that the seed is just a compact, ready to go little organism, and it's just waiting for the right conditions to sprout. So if a lot of times if we have perennial gardens and that sort of thing, we will go ahead and deadhead our plants to ensure that they keep on blooming, or we cut them to bring them in as cut flowers and enjoy them. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But if left alone, you will see, just as that coneflower picture there, that the seeds will form on the plant and eventually they will drop to the ground, and hopefully they'll meet the right conditions to start the next generation of plants. So essentially that is what winter sowing does. We're just replicating what Mother Nature does. So many seeds will germinate immediately after falling from the plant in the summer or fall. And they will go ahead and germinate so that by the time the cool seasons get here, it may kill them off. But however, some seeds, especially in our temperate climate that we live in, they don't germinate immediately, and they are what we consider dormant. And this dormancy assures that the seeds get through the harsh winter weather and then germinate in the spring when the growing conditions are optimal for them. And in fact, dormant seeds have evolved to need certain environmental or chemical changes that actually triggers the end of dormancy and triggers germination. So what are those triggers? And I've got a little diagram up here, shows you all about what can trigger it. Some in embryonic dormancy, a lot of times it may be a chemical cue that actually triggers it. And specific seasonal cues have to take place. And until that occurs with like ethylene signal and the ABA signal, which are all shorter names for some longer words there, but until they actually signal to the seed, okay, it's time to start growing, that seed will stay dormant. And then actually it's the cold in a lot of cases that trigger that chemical reaction to take place. So these seeds may actually go ahead and germinate, but if they have no cold whatsoever, most of the time, germination is pretty poor. But if they have an enduring cold, and that's just not, like one night it got down really cold and then the next day it was back up in more moderate temperatures, they have to have an enduring cold of over weeks and even months. And when they have an enduring cold, then that's when the chemical reaction kicks in and you have a lot better germination. Oh, went backwards, sorry. Another trigger actually is, or another way that seeds will protect themselves from germinating during the wrong time, is that they will have a very hard seed coat. And actual exposure to the moist cold will help break down the shell for easier germination. Now, a lot of times we as gardeners you'll see those seeds that it says scratch the surface of it, put little marks in the surface, sand them down, and also soak them. This is helping to soften up that seed coat. And in nature, a lot of times it's just the moist cold that helps it over time, or even sometimes they have to go through like the gut of some type of animal, and the stomach acids will help break down and soften up that seed coat. But so essentially, both chemical and environmental things apply to the seeds and will trigger them into germinating. And we're going to use some of those principles to do what we want to do. So the best gardening methods mimic Mother Nature. And I agree with that. It's like, why should we try to reinvent the wheel? So this method that I'm going to talk about today is actually what we call cold stratification. And I know Amy had a program earlier in the year about cold stratification. And we've probably all heard of that, but cold stratification is the process of using the cold temperatures and the moistness of some of the winter to help breaking that dormancy cycle. Okay. And some of the more common species that actually need cold temperatures or cold stratification are woody plants and herbaceous plants such as milkweed. If you're thinking about adding to your garden, butterfly garden or pollinator garden, milkweed is one of those that can use this type of strategy. Coneflower, even flowering dogwood and redwood. Also annuals such as poppies and cosmos and snapdragons. There's a big list of plants that actually will work well for this, or seeds. A lot of times the way you find out about this is you just look at your seed packet, and on the back it will tell you if there's a cold period requirement for germination. But it's always a good idea if you have an idea, say, I want to try this certain seed. It's always a good idea to do research on it and see what its germination needs are, especially if you're collecting and saving your seeds. Of course, you'll have those seeds in your garden so you can actually observe them and decide what is the best way. Well, winter sowing actually started off, it became a thing in the early 2000s. And this lady named Trudy Davidoff, she popularized the technique, and she was just a gardening enthusiast. And she said, what would happen if I save these seeds that naturally would just fall off and germinate in my garden? What if I save them and try to mimic that? One way would be to, pack them up and put them in a refrigerator and that sort of thing. Of course, that takes up room and all of that sort of thing. But she came up with this idea of using containers for the method. And it actually, finally, they had to have a USDA definition of it. And winter sowing here's their USDA definition. Propagation method used throughout the winter when temperate climate seeds are sown into vented containers and placed outdoors to foster naturally timed high percentages of germination of climate tolerant seedlings. So we've got it there. So why do you want to winter sow? Why would you want to even deal with this? Well, for one thing, it's sustainable and it's environmentally friendly. It requires no electricity. This is not like a greenhouse or anything like that. In fact, you're sort of creating your own mini greenhouse, but very naturally. It uses upcycled or recycled containers, things that you already have around the house. Once you know what you're doing, you can sort of look for those attributes that the container needs to have and start saving some. It also uses less water, just because really you don't water them at all, except for at the very beginning when you get your plants start or your seeds started. And essentially the seeds manage on their own until they're ready to transplant in the garden. Now you can check on them every once in a while, but you could also just forget about them and let them go, and they would still take care of the process. It's extremely easy for all skill levels of gardeners. Also, it's inexpensive. I mean, for the most part, you may have to buy seeds, and you probably want to get some fresh soil. Make sure you have some fresh soil, and it needs to have vermiculite or perlite in it. It has to be well drained. But that's about it. The rest of it you sort of save on your own. No worries about a space or a mess. I know at my house, sometimes space is limited, and to start your seed, you have to have a warm spot. And, in the early years, you'd have things on kitchen counters or, in the dining room where the sun came in and that sort of thing. So, and then you might get the mess of watering and keeping things moist and all of that sort of thing, because inside during the winter, our houses are very dry for the most part. But here you don't have to worry about space or mess. Also, you can grow a wide variety of plants because you're seeking out the seeds to grow these plants. So if you have an idea or you see a new seed variety or species of something that you want to try, this would be a good way to try that. Also, it produces strong, healthy plants because they're following, just the natural way that they would germinate naturally. Also, it prevents damping off, and there's no need to harden off the seeds. And I won't go into the definition of that because there's no need to. It's already provided for you. You're hardening them up really as they germinate and thrive. So when to sow, and I'm going on our area, probably zone 6 and zone 7 on the hardiness zone. But you can start in December, January, and February. And most of the native plants, and there's so many websites anymore that sell native seed, you can use December, January, February to start that native seed. Other perennials, and what I was interested in, it says lavender. And I was always considering lavender to be, more Mediterranean, probably a warmer, drier climate. But I'm definitely going to try some lavender this year. Any type of native grasses, vines, even trees and shrubs. And then also, you can do cold weather veggies, spinach, kale, Brussels sprouts, that sort of thing. Those cold season vegetables that need an early start anyway. This is a good method for them. It also lends itself to herbs. They can be started this way, and even some hardy annuals. Poppies, for one thing. I've always had trouble with poppies for the most part. And I know it's just because I didn't really put them through enough cold stratification. So I plan on hopefully being able to start some of those this year with that. Now, let's get prepared to start. This is just the list of everything you'll need. Of course, you want to gather your seed. You need to research your seed ahead of time and make sure that they need cold stratification, how long and that sort of thing. You can find that information, as I said, usually in garden catalogs will tell you. Your county agent should be able to help you with that. And then also, if you happen to go online, you say, well, I'm going to go online, and you know how reliable that is at times. But if you type in winter sowing or cold stratification seeds, and then put a comma and extension. Your things that you pull up from that should be information that research-based information from extension offices or land grant universities from around the state and also around the country. But you can also experiment, it's like what you're really going to be out is just a couple of seeds and a little bit of garden soil. Everything else is like recycled or things that you have at home. And so you just experiment with something. And I kept reading about tomatoes. They say tomatoes do very well, but tomatoes are, you always have to start those inside and they have to wait to be planted outside after danger of frost and that sort of thing. So that would be interesting to try. So the tools that we need are, of course, duct tape, a serrated knife, sharp scissors. You need some empty, rinsed plastic containers. Out here at the office with meetings and that sort of thing, a lot of times we have water jugs or tea jugs or something like that that was used for a dinner or, a lunch or something here at the office that sort of end up staying in the refrigerator for a little while. And I go in there and clean it out every once in a while. So it's looked on as a good thing because I'm helping to clean out the refrigerator, but also I'm gleaning all those milk or water jugs that, were just left in there and would go into the trash or recycling. But you can even use 2-liter bottles. You can use takeout containers. One lady actually that I was reading about uses large casserole pans, the big aluminum pans that we have around Thanksgiving that even come with a plastic lid. Those are perfect. And she actually says she sort of compared it to milk jugs and the aluminum pans, and she got better results and better germination. I think it was like with the milk jug, it was something like 68 to 75% of them germinated. And with her aluminum pan, she said she had about 90 to 95% germination, depending on what she was sowing. So that would be something to try. Also, you want to have a permanent marker or labels. And I'll show you later an example of labels that can be created. And fresh potting soil or any soil mix that has peat moss or perlite in it. You want to make sure that you have those because that type of soil will help retain water. You don't want it to be wet, but you do want your soil to be able to retain some water. Also, once you get ready to get started, you have everything assembled. You of course, clean out your rinsed containers, make sure there's no sour milk or anything like that in it, and clean them out. And you use that knife or scissors to about 5 to 6 inches from the bottom of the jug. You're going to slice around the circumference of that container. But you want, especially with milk jugs, in your liter bottles and that sort of thing, you want to leave at least 1 to 2 inches, say at the back, that acts as a hinge so that you can actually close it up or open it up, because that will become important possibly later. Of course, if you're using the aluminum pans or if you're using plastic lids from containers where you had takeout or, a frozen food entree or something like that, you won't need to worry about that because a lot of times they'll have it on there. So the next thing you need to do is make sure that you have plenty of ventilation. And so you can use like a hot glue gun without the glue in it because you're looking for the heated tip. A lot of folks I read about would use a Phillips head screwdriver and heat up the tip of that and actually melt into the plastic. But a hot glue gun will work as well to create holes in your jug. So if you were using a milk jug, you would want, first of all, to make holes in the bottom of it, and that's with any container. You want to have drainage holes in the bottom, but also you want to put it in your lid. You want to have some holes there and maybe even around the side, because you want to make sure that you, first of all, have plenty of drainage and that you also have air movement and moisture venting, because these, when they're closed, can build up a lot of moisture. Some things I read suggested that you remove the cap and throw it away. Some things I read kept the cap on there. And I think you could use the cap as another one of those venting techniques. So if you can, keep the cap and just use that as a venting technique. You want to get your soil ready by moistening it first, get it nice and moist. That will help with the water retention and that sort of thing. And you want to fill the container with about 5 inches of soil. Now, this will vary, of course, to what kind of container you're using, but you do want to have plenty of soil so they will have germination and the roots will be able to go down. But you also need headroom so that they can grow and develop once they become seedlings. So for a milk jug, it's about 5 inches of soil, and then they have plenty of room at the top to grow. You want to gently pat that down. And now might be a good time to label your container. At least you want to put the seed name on there and also the date you started. All right, so once you get all of that set up, you want to lightly scatter the seeds onto the soil surface and cover them gently with more soil after that. Someone mentioned putting maybe some sand on there. That helps to hold the seeds down, and they won't blow away if you happen to open the lid or anything like that. But I think a little light soil just gently tamped down over it will do just fine. But you do need to note that some seeds do need light to germinate. I do know lavender needs light to germinate, so you really don't want to cover it with a lot of soil or no soil at all. You want to leave it open to the light where light can get it. Okay, so please note that you can winter sow from December through February, depending on your climate, and that perennials and hardy annuals can be sown earlier in December, while your tender plants, say like vegetables and that sort of thing, or a different type that doesn't need much cold stratification, can be sown up into February. Now, once you have your container and you're thinking about sowing your seeds, there's a couple of ways you could do this. I have planned just to scatter mine evenly over the top of it, and once they develop into seedlings, I'll sort of gently pull them apart in clumps, or you can even take a little knife and slice them up like a pan of brownies or cake to get them out and to be able to transplant them outside. Some people actually really take time to space them nicely and so that they can be easily divided. The only thing I see wrong with that is that you're reducing your germination possibility. The more seeds you have, the better off you are as far as percentages of having plants that will, you'll be able to transplant into your garden later on. Even some folks, and this is a good example, like with the aluminum baking pans, because you have such a much larger surface area there, they actually use it's that poster board, cardboard, foam core kind of board that they just recycled from different things they had at home, yard sale signs or whatever, and made little dividers that way. And you can see those at the very end there. Now, if you do this with several dividers and everything and plant different seeds in different divider areas, you will need to make sure that you label those. Okay, label the container, list the plant type and the planting date. Close that container, and you want to secure it with your duct tape. Again, the cap is sort of controversial. You can leave it on or you can leave it off. I say leave it on until it looks like you maybe need to take it off to increase air circulation and remove some moisture. But no matter what you do, you want to make sure that you do have plenty of air circulation, and that can be remedied by punching some more holes in it if you think you need to. Now, this is the simple part. You place the container in a protected area of your yard. You want to make sure that it's away from pets or children's play areas. Areas should receive full sunlight and also be able to receive rain and snow if snow occurs. You leave them sealed throughout and check on them from time to time. That would be the hardest part for me, is not being able to pop open that top anytime and take a look. You need to really sort of leave them be and let them do their own thing. Seedlings will begin to germinate and develop when the cold stratification conditions are met. And like I said, with some seeds, it could be a few weeks or whatever. Sometimes it can be a few months. So you do need to sort of double check and make sure that you're setting them out early enough to get in that cold stratification. And then with our, had some mild winters, especially here in Scott County and the area, you're hoping that it actually gets down cold enough to actually send them into that cold stratification process that is met. I know it's a couple of years ago, we planted some daffodil bulbs, and that year when they came up, they weren't quite it just seemed like they struggled a little bit. And finally I figured out, well, I don't know that we had enough cold stratification days for them, because it was one of those years where it was warm in February, and then it would dip down for a week or two, and then it would warm back up. So we have to watch that. Now, once you put the containers outside, there's really nothing else you need to do. I think the hardest part for me, and the most exciting part, is just waiting and seeing what develops. So there at number 8, germination. Seeds will absorb water and expand, cracking open the seed coat. First, the root will emerge, and that anchors the plant. Shoots will emerge after that, and those will have 1 or 2 seed leaves. And these are those leaves that they all look alike. You couldn't tell whether you had broccoli or if you had maybe, a coneflower or something. They all are sort of similarly shaped. You really can't tell the difference. So those are the seed leaves. And they're actually there to tightly close around the shoot apical meristem to help protect it. And that meristem is where it expands and grows. And when the seedlings actually start getting light in on them, they will open up and turn green. So you've got your first you get to witness the first photosynthesis of the young plant. Now, there are some things can affect your seedling development. It can be the size and viability of the seed. If I use some of the seed that we've had here at the office that have been around for a couple of years, I might not have as good a germination as I would with fresher seed. The time and depth of sowing, the genetic makeup of the seed, the conditions of the seed bed, and of course, moisture and temperature conditions. Now, here are a few pictures. As you see, it can be as plain or as fancy as you want, or as easy and simple as you want. That top one is one of the aluminum pans with the top on it. They haven't sealed it all the way around, but it does, that top will actually snap down pretty good, and they just placed some duct tape around it. But if you look, they probably divided it up on the inside, as we saw earlier, and they've actually labeled it with labels, say, with what type of seed it is, the scientific name, the everyday name, and it even has like how much sun it will take and what type of soil it needs and how much moisture. So, they're really serious about this, which could really help, when you're doing that. But some folks, as you see down below that, have them lined up against the house. And in fact, that sort of looks like my house, although I've never done this before. But they have them lined up against the house, and they've got a little bit of duct tape. They don't really have them all sealed up the way they suggested, but they do have them lined up against the house. The last picture over there just has the milk jug, and you see it has the cap on it, and the other picture does not. But with this one particular one, they do have it all the way, duct tape all the way around, and then they just took a permanent marker and wrote coneflowers, January 10th of 2022. So, as I said, it can be as simple or as complicated as you want it to be. Now, when it comes time to transplant, there are some things that you're going to want to look for. If you happen to open the container after they germinate and take a good look at them, the first thing you'll probably see are the seed leaves. And you see the diagram there. It has those, all seed leaves sort of, to me, all sort of look the same. And they're there. They're not the true leaves that will have them. And you really couldn't tell the difference between one seed germinating to another variety or species of seed germinating with just going by the seed leaves. So once they start to develop seed leaves, you may want to move your containers to some shade or some dappled shade or somewhere where they won't get the hot afternoon sun on them if there's a warm spell. Also, if it says it's going to dip down really low tonight, folks, you can also throw a blanket over them or a row cover just to keep them safe from the cold spell. But once they reach the top of the containers, it's probably time to pull back the covers, which means you flip open the tops as you see in the picture down below there, and sort of let them just have the air and they'll acclimate fully to the environment. And you don't want to transplant them, of course, until they have at least 2 true leaves. And you can see in the diagram there that it has 2 sets. Of course, the second set is a little smaller, but those are 2 sets of true leaves, and they look like the leaves that your plant will have as it's growing. At this time, you can gently pull them apart, or we talked about cutting them apart, or however. And when you do transplant them into your garden, a space that you have ready, you want to make sure that you water them thoroughly. Now, I didn't spend any time at all on transplanting them. This is just getting them through the season and getting them, grown up. But I did go ahead and look up some things that, some seeds to get you started. So you'll sort of have some guidance on what works, when should I do this, how long does it need. But this is by no means an exhaustive list. So we have our A group, which is early winter sowing, which may be in November and December. Your seed packet, if you have a seed packet, will recommends months of cold stratification. And it will have a lot of your native plants, your native shrubs, trees, and vines, which I said, there are sources for those now. It also will include many of your flowering perennials, and it might even include some of your cool season vegetables. Although I think that might be pushing it a little bit, but it might not hurt to just take one little container and devote it to like some broccoli or Brussels sprouts and see how early you can actually start it and get it to a good garden plant in the spring. Milkweed, especially if you're doing this for a pollinator garden, milkweed will need that early sowing of, say, November and December. Milkweed also will develop a long taproot, so you want to make sure that you're very careful with that when you start to transplant and that sort of thing. The next time frame is like the B group, which will be in January and February. The packets will say need moderate periods of stratification. And generally, this is used again for hardy perennials and even some annuals. Your seed catalogs sometimes list suggestions by sowing time. You see the little map of the US, and it'll have times to sow or times to plant, to start and that sort of thing. You can sort of go by those. But also you want to be aware, and this is not just for group B plants or seeds, but it's for all of them. You want to make sure that you're picking seeds to use that are suited to your hardiness zone and to your growing conditions and climate. And also make sure you know what your invasives are, because you can still buy some seeds to use, but actually they're very invasive in the garden and can take over a space. So you want to make sure you're aware of that as well. Also, the late winter, early spring, say April, May time frame. This could be some of the time when the seeds that you want to start, maybe you would have started them indoors, like a lot of your vegetable seeds, maybe even your tomato seeds to give them a try. But again, as I suggested, just give a few a try and compare the results. And that would be a great thing. If this is the first time you have decided to do this, is just take notes throughout and just note, this worked well, that did not. This seed really did well, this one struggled, that sort of thing. Notes are always important in your garden. Now, this is from a master gardener group from the University of Maryland, but they used this as a fundraiser, actually. And they had a $3 packet of the cardinal flower, Lobelia cardinalis, and they planted those in milk jugs. And they were able to actually harvest or have on hand 60 plants from winter sowing from that $3 seed packet. And where they were figuring that they could actually grow them or sell them for about $6.50 a pot. And from what they had started, they had about 60 plants. So from a $3 investment, maybe just a little bit if you count the soil, they almost got back $400 in profit for that. So that's not too bad. So in summary, sometimes the simplest ways to start transplants are by following nature. Follow what your plant demands in nature. But they do require cold stratification. If you've always struggled with one seed, trying to get it started early, when I was very young, I wanted to grow poppies so bad, but I never could, or I'd get one or two. And now I realize they needed to go through that cold stratification period. Seeds planted and cared for this way, they actually have a head start on other plants that you may have started indoors during February and March. And then you don't have to go through the hardening off process or worrying about the dampening off that occurs sometimes with seeds indoors that you're growing indoors. Also, you'll have a head start any kind of weed once you get them into your garden, because your plants will be fully developed and ready to take off, and it will give you a head start over any weeds because they will be developing and germinating about that time. So they should be easy to tell what's a good transplant and what is actually a weed germinating. Armed with this knowledge of which seeds need cold stratification, you can grow many of the plants that in the past you may have had trouble with. So I'm looking very forward to trying that out.